Hi, I guess we are starting this program. I'm just checking something, uh, having not done this before. There we go. And I know there's some of you here waiting, and I hope you have the live chat where you can see it and use it. So maybe someone watching who's adept at this, if you could send a chat and I can just see, say you're there, etc., and make sure that I'm able to questions and comments. Oh, there's one. Okay, great. So since it's just barely 6:30, if anyone else wants to say hello. Oh, hey, Mary Ellen, good to see you. Um, I'll wait a few more minutes. Obviously, there's a lot to discuss. Hi, Milena. Good. I'm sure everybody's on there. Well, no one knows what's going to happen, so everybody is a little bit on edge, and we're all figuring out how we're going to be able to stay pent up in our houses for however long this is going to go on. Some of us think that the dogs had a conspiracy to keep us all home with them. Someone else told me that someone put out a tweet saying that now that they've spent 30 minutes trying to homeschool their 6-year-old, they think teachers should each be paid $1 million a year. All right, so let's see here. 2 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and start because I think there's going to be lots of questions and discussion, and we're really in an unbelievable crisis situation, which is not simply the coronavirus, which is called a pandemic because it is global and is spreading very rapidly. As people know, you may have seen that President Trump has issued new, stricter recommendations today in terms of social distancing. But I think everybody already has begun. And I'll just go through a little bit of what we know about the virus. And I'm speaking to you as a layman. I am not a medical doctor. I have a number of medical doctors in my family, but they are not epidemiologists or infectious disease specialists. So I'm just going to tell you what has been said by the experts so far. And obviously, all of them are saying every situation is different. We don't know all of the factors that affect this, etc. But what we know from the situation, from what happened in China, is that for people over the age of 80 who were infected with coronavirus, the fatality rate was 15%. For people over the age of 70, it was 7%. Once you get down to 50, it's 0.3%. And they had, with all of their 70,000 or so, 80,000 infections, no one under the age of 19 died, and I'm not sure if anyone under that age even tested positive for the infection. We also know that what is being said is that if the spread is not stopped, that you could project that this will infect from between 40 to 70% of the population. And if 20% of that needs to be hospitalized, you're looking at a need of something like 48 million hospital beds. In the United States right now, we have about 800,000 hospital beds. We actually have about half as many hospital beds as we had in the 1970s. And that is in part due to what happened in 1971. Not only was the dollar decoupled from gold, but Ted Kennedy and Richard Nixon signed the HMO law into existence. We had health insurance prior to that, but with the HMOs, it became a new thing that an insurance company could make a profit by denying care. And we saw that completely to an extreme under President Barack Obama and these standards there. And we did a lot of work trying to stop his health care plan because it actually was not health care for everyone. It was a denial of health care for everyone and a gigantic bailout for the insurance companies and a desire to increase the death rates. And that's part of what we're confronted with here. I think we have to take the approach that we are really going to fight this thing, that triage is not something that we should be willing to accept. We should commit ourselves to doing everything in our power to create the necessary conditions to provide care for everyone. And I see, Mary Ellen, what you're saying about the empty hospital. We have empty hospitals all over the country. Our lovely former mayor, Michael Bloomberg, presided over the shutdown of 20 hospitals while he was mayor. So these things have to be brought back online on a crash basis. I want to share with you something that came out in the British press where you see the difference. A fellow named Jeremy Warner, who is a writer for the London Telegraph, said, quote, the coronavirus could prove mildly beneficial to the UK economy by culling the population of the elderly. He said the Spanish flu was much more devastating because it got rid of young people who were working age, but this could be very helpful because everyone knows, and this was Obama's argument as well, that as people get older, their health care is more expensive. So we could save a lot of money and a lot of resources if they would just die off. That is the British view. That is the view of Prince Philip, who said the Queen, and she hasn't seemed to be willing to die off early. She's been hanging around for quite a long time. But Prince Philip, who said that he would like to be reincarnated as a deadly virus to do something about overpopulation. So I think that's a horror. We don't want to get to that point. But if you're looking at the gap, needing a potential of 48 million hospital beds and having only 800,000, obviously something's got to give. And this is why, if people saw Governor Cuomo's press conference, he had the graphics up there, the drawings, the images of the curve, and he said it's a wave right now that's going to crush our healthcare system, or if we can slow down the spread, that perhaps we can prevent the system from being overwhelmed. I think we have to do more than that. I think we have to take a super aggressive approach as they did in China. And if we can't do it the way they did in China, people might feel more comfortable doing what was done in South Korea, which is massive testing, taking people's temperature everywhere. I had commented not that long ago, everyone who has a smartphone, you may know that the NSA is, they're dinging your smartphone every 2 seconds. They know where we are. So what if they started taking our temperature or whatever they can do? I'm sure they can do it, and I'll have some pictures of that. If Dave, you can put up the slide from the press about Italy. This is the danger in the United States because we began late. For some reason, the CDC did not take advantage of the test kits, the test that was designed by the World Health Organization, and wanted to wait and make their own test. The test then didn't work. We're finally just now, and it was a very interesting and important move, I think, that President Trump is enlisting all of these private companies Google, Walmart, etc., making them do something for the good of the country. But you see here in Italy, this is from yesterday, I don't know where they stand now, coronavirus deaths rise 25% to 1,809, because what happened was they did not do mass testing, they did not do quarantining, they have an older population, so the thing just took off in Lombardy. And then when the government gave the orders to close Lombardy, everyone got in trains and fled to the southern part of Italy, which you don't want. So then they announced the lockdown of the whole country, with the result that the hospitals in the north have been completely overwhelmed. And the doctors there, it's been reported, are having to make such decisions. Who gets the ventilator? If you have 3 people who all need a ventilator, which person is going to get it? Turning people away at the emergency room. Also, I heard an interview where it was said that the doctors and nurses in Italy are so overwhelmed that many of them have become infected with the coronavirus themselves. And as you know, in 80% of the people, the symptoms are not severe. So they are now trying to work with these symptoms and work sick. And I guess you can argue, well, the patients they're working on already have coronavirus, so they're not going to do harm there. But imagine the unbelievable taxation of the system, the extreme fatigue of these doctors, and the situation there. I know that China has just sent in China, which did massive testing, massive quarantining, and it was described by one medical expert who was there, that he said literally everywhere people went, whether you got on a bus, got on a train, went to the store, your temperature was monitored with infrared. In other words, they didn't have to touch you. If you had a temperature, you would immediately go to a fever clinic where you would be tested. They would do CT scans right on the spot. And if you had coronavirus, you would be, if you needed hospitalization, but chances are if you're running around, you didn't need hospitalization, you would be sent to a hospital, or you'd be sent, they had many hospitals and centers for people who were not horribly ill, but to keep them from going back to be with their family. That something like 80% of the spread was within families, within households. And that's not that uncommon for an airborne disease, of course. If you're in close contact with a particular group of people, like the conference that happened in Boston and so on, that's where you get the spread. So they took an extremely aggressive approach and built 14 temporary hospitals in 2 weeks. They built emergency hospitals with only ICU units, with a special design of corridor going down the middle. Apparently there was a press conference today, which I only heard about secondhand, but they discussed the design of these hospitals for doing this kind of treatment. And they built other hospitals for people who were not terribly ill, who didn't need ICU treatment, but had to be given minimal care and separated from the population. They've now closed down 14 of the temporary hospitals, and the situation in Wuhan was clear enough that President Xi Jinping has been able to walk down the streets of that city. So the point of that is that it is possible to beat this, but you have to be scientific and you have to be rigorous about it. I think the situation in the United States right now is going to get probably much worse before it gets better. We do need an emergency mobilization to create the hospital space, hospital beds. Cuomo mentioned converting dorms. Mary Ellen just talked about the closed down hospital in Staten Island. These places are all over the place. Someone would have to get an assessment of what could be rebuilt, what not. But we're going to we're going to see major effects of this. The other aspect, which everyone is aware of, is the blowout of the financial system, which was going to happen anyway. Since 2008, we have been only printing money, and we're going to hear from Mr. LaRouche in a minute by video, and then I'm going to show you a chart that he did. But the coronavirus is only the trigger for something that was going to happen anyway. It's impossible that the stock market, frankly, could have been as high as it was, because we're not producing in the United States enough product commensurate with the amount of money that's in circulation. That's how you get hyperinflation. So we are seeing a pandemic disease and the blowout of a financial system that was on its last legs. And that's what we have to actually create a movement to solve right now. And I think we have an opportunity to do that. But what I'd like you to hear from is Lyndon LaRouche, who died at the age of 96 on Abraham Lincoln's birthday in 2019. He was the greatest economist and genius that the United States has produced thus far. Some of you know that he was put in prison after he worked with Ronald Reagan by Robert Mueller, the very same one who was going after President Trump. And this is a speech that he gave in 1995, about 1 year after he was released from prison. And when you hear the opening, you'll think it could just about have been given this week.
During the 4 sessions this weekend, many of you at many points will be shocked, not by the choice of language, I believe, but by the fact that in a period which the Supreme Court of the United States has said that innocence is no reason to stop an execution, that anything that is said in the direction of telling the truth tends to be shocking. Is going these days. Justice is not a word which commands anymore. We are now in the next 18 to 24 months, the world is gripped with the most dangerous, most momentous, and most profound developments in the past 5 centuries of human history. At stake is the question of whether we shall emerge from the 1990s into a prolonged new dark age which will engulf this planet for 100 or 200 years to come, a dark age in which the population of this planet will sink from over 5 billion to at most a few hundred million. A time, a dark age in which a nightmare beyond belief will control this world. Or we can salvage the achievements of civilization to date, and those achievements which were given by the development of a revolution which began in Europe between 550 and 510 years ago. Between the Council of Florence, which established a new principle to govern all states, all society, not a principle which was immediately put into effect completely, but a principle which began to work to change the world. And about 510 years ago, a little more than that, the end of the monarchy of France's King Louis XI, who in the 20 years of his reign established the first civilized form of society on this planet, as I shall explain, which was called by him a commonwealth, in which all the citizens of the nation were bound together to build the nation so that the nation might foster the well-being and development of every individual in it. The principle was that every person on this planet is made in the living image of God the Creator, This image, as I shall indicate today, is not a bodily image, not a graven image. It is an image of intellect. It is an image of a creative power of intellect, which no animal species has. The issue is of this battle of the coming 18 to 24 months, the battle that will decide the future of mankind for centuries to come, in which we play a part in that battle. Is man, as Prince Philip, the fascist beast, says, is man a higher ape, or is man a creature in the living image of God the Creator by virtue of creative intellect? That is what the issue is.
Great. So on that question, actually, before I go to the chart, if Dave, you could put up the chart of human population growth. I want to show you a chart that Al Gore has used for bad reasons, but it happens to be true. And this is the growth of human population. No, go back to the yellow one. From the beginning of, what does that say? It's hard to read here on my computer screen. 10,000 BC up to, the year 2000. And you can see there's a little dip in there during the bubonic plague in the 1300s. But no animal actually is capable of sustaining this kind of hyperbolic growth. If you think about rabbits or deer, they do the same thing from one generation to the next. So if they happen to consume all of a particular resource, then they die off. Yeah, this is the convenient truth. It's not the inconvenient truth. But human beings, on the other hand, have a mind. As LaRouche was saying, what does it mean to be created in the image of the Creator? Is it that we look like God? Well, I don't think any of us knows what God looks like, but the question of creativity, of being creative, of being able to make a discovery. So if you discover how to do mass irrigation, then the land that you're farming becomes much more productive than if you hadn't. Similarly with fertilizer or mechanized agriculture or the kind of farming we have today, where you're literally using space technology to analyze the chemical content of the soil. The farming today is unbelievable, and it directly benefits from the space program because you are using the satellites to analyze the soil and then instruct the whatever spreader you're using to put the fertilizer in exactly how much to put in each place in the soil. It's really amazing. So obviously, no chimpanzee or donkey changes the way it lives, but human beings actually don't have a limit. We probably could have 100,000 people, 100 billion people living on this planet with a higher standard of living than we have today, as long as we allow and encourage this kind of creativity, of scientific breakthroughs, of discoveries of universal principle. And that's why when we had the space program, the Apollo mission of Kennedy, that the economy grew so much because not only did we land a man on the moon and begin to explore our solar system, but we also, the applications of learning the principles to do that could be used on Earth to massively improve the standard of living. So now I want to go to the triple curve function of LaRouche. So you can see there this thing that looks like a trumpet bell, and I want to be really explicit. It's not three curves. You see a red line, a green line, and a yellow line, but it's three curves which are part of one function, which is the current blowout of our economic system. That if you take the starting point as 1966, at that time, what was happening with the stock market and what was happening with physical economic output and input, that is physical production, manufacturing, industry, that kind of thing, was part of the same thing. So when you invested in the space program, the stock market went up, the economy as a whole improved. When we shut down the space program, and particularly after 71, when the dollar was decoupled from gold, what happened was money became separate from your physical productivity. For example, if you take something as simple as speculating on the value of a foreign currency, prior to 1971, since the dollar was pegged to gold and other currencies were pegged to the dollar or pegged to gold, you had fixed exchange rates. So if it was 6 Deutschmarks to the dollar this week, it would be the same next week, it would be the same next month, and there was a certain stability in the system, and the money changed hands because of trade, because of actual import and export of goods. Once you had this decoupling, you could gamble, you could speculate, well, I'm going to buy $3 million worth of Deutschmarks because I think the value of the Deutschmark is going to go up relative to the dollar. And when it goes up, I'm going to sell them off and then I'm going to make money. Now, in that kind of transaction, what was exchanged? There was nothing real involved in that. It was a gambling decision to make money based on the fluctuation of the currency. And by about 1995, what LaRouche said is that less than 2% of international financial transactions had anything to do with physical production. And in fact, it got to the point that the more money that you printed, the more that you were sucking out of the physical economy. And yeah, exactly like the housing bubble, exactly like this mortgage thing, where they were literally running around to even illegal immigrants who couldn't speak English, getting them to sign mortgage papers because they wanted to bundle them and sell them to someone who was going to gamble on it. So you have an economy, and that would make the stock market go up. Isn't that crazy? You would think that doing this crazy stuff would make the stock market go down. No, it made it go up because you had more things sloshing around, more money in circulation. So LaRouche's point is that this stock market has been a fictitious bubble of crap for a long time, and it is going to have to collapse. But you don't just want to have an uncontrolled implosion. What you want to do is to reinstate the Glass-Steagall principle, which is that you go back to having savings and loan banks, which only do savings and loans. They do small business loans, they have your savings account, your mortgage, etc. And if people want to play the markets, if they want to gamble or whatever, that's fine. They can go to an investment firm, but they don't get a money back guarantee. The idea that all of these entities, which were doing all this crap in 2008, were not allowed to just go bankrupt, which is what they were, and were instead bailed out, created a crazy situation. And we have paid for it in the form of hyperinflation, all of these things that make people very upset, like what you're paying in property taxes, for example, versus what you're getting for it, or what you're paying in tolls when you cross any major bridge between New York and New Jersey. And you look at the condition of the roads, or you take the Portal Bridge, which I naively thought was an exaggeration when I heard that every time the bridge opens, this is the one Amtrak crossing from New Jersey to the rest of the country, every time a boat comes through, a person has to come out with a sledgehammer to hammer the bridge back together. That's crazy. But people are paying tens of millions of dollars a day in tolls. The New Jersey Transit, I looked up a few years ago, I think had spent at least $56 million, had lost $56 million on derivatives or interest rate swaps. That is $56 million, which had nothing to do with how much you paid people or track maintenance. It was pure speculation. And that's what we're doing. So what President Trump announced on Sunday in terms of the Federal Reserve buying back $500 billion of US treasuries is not going to help the economy. It's just fueling this horrible bubble which is going to burst. As one of my colleagues said, if we actually invested the same amount of money that we're using on these bailouts, instead of trying to prop up the treasury bonds, if we bought state bonds, that would pay for building 800 new hospitals and add about 400,000 hospital beds to our situation. Now, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work as those are kind of apples and oranges. But what I want to do is just actually go through what LaRouche's 4 laws are, because this is what we have to urgently get done. I will say, in a sense, it's a benefit what's about to happen to everyone. Although it's horrible, it's nerve-wracking, it's uncomfortable, because everything's going to stop. What are the restaurants going to do when no one can go there to eat? They have to shut down. What's going to happen to the owners of these restaurants? As people may know, I direct a community chorus in Manhattan, and we have several pianists whom we pay to accompany the choir rehearsals. We're not going to have any rehearsals for several months. And at the moment, I'd like to continue to pay the pianists, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do that. Think about all these musicians. Many of the people that I know in the city are professional musicians. They work on Broadway, they work at Lincoln Center, they work at different places. They're now out of work potentially for months. How are they going to pay their rent, their utilities? People across the board are going to find themselves in a situation at ground zero, where if we were in normal times, you would just be evicted, or if it was just you. Now in Italy, what they did is they declared a moratorium on mortgage payments. People will not have to make mortgage payments during this, or probably rent payments. They also told people to stop going to the post office to pay their electricity bill, probably to stop them from paying their electricity bill. I mean, from going to the post office, but also what's people's source of income. The entire economy, virtually, except for our farmers, thank God they're producing to feed us and so on. But many, many things have completely ground to a halt. There's no trade, there's no transactions. So we have an opportunity where we can absolutely start from scratch. And I see, Mary Ellen, what you're saying, you're getting paid to stay home. Well, that's good, but substitute teachers, others, sure, are right to be worried. So you're going to need a massive, consistent federal policy on this. And the first step, I would say, is do a bankruptcy or reorganization. Let's just go through this. What happened when the banks were closed in the Great Depression? FDR declared a bank holiday, and they took 4 days, and it was done state by state. Every state had to assign various administrators to actually go through the books, determine what was legitimate debt, what had to be saved, what would have to be paid, what was illegitimate, like these mortgage-backed securities or other kinds of crap, which wouldn't be saved. But the priority was the people. you prioritize the things that exist in the real world. You prioritize the things that allow your society to function. So let's go to the four laws. I think there's a slide just of, yes, this is what LaRouche called it, not an option, an immediate necessity. So we can go to the first. And this is what I said, the reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall law, which is the separation of the banks into actual savings and loan banks that don't gamble, and on the other hand, the speculators. Next. Second, and I think this might be highly relevant right now, a return to a system of top-down, thoroughly defined national banking. The actually tested successful model to be authorized is that which had been instituted under the direction of the policies of national banking, which had been installed under Abraham Lincoln's superseding authority of a currency created by the presidency of the United States, the greenbacks, as conducted as a national banking and credit system placed under the supervision of the Office of the Treasury Secretary of the United States. The greenbacks, what were they? They weren't backed by gold. They were backed by the faith of the government of the United States. He had to do that to be able to fund the Union Army, the war, and the Transcontinental Railroad. The government can do something like that. Unfortunately, right now we have a Federal Reserve, which is unconstitutional and has private, it's run by private bankers. They're not beholden to our elected government. So LaRouche had proposed actually to nationalize the Federal Reserve. He said there are some people in there who are competent bankers, but they should be under the employment of our actual government and beholden to do those things in the interest of the United States, not the interest of the globally, whatever they're called, the GSIFIs, globally significant institutional something or others, the too big to fail banks or too big to jail. I'll just say here, you may have noticed that with everything that happened in 2008 and what's been going on still, not one single major banker has gone to jail, which I think is a big deal. So once we have our national bank, then what? That's the step number 3. This is the question of credit. As you can see, the government just committed to spending $1.5 trillion on just paper. And why not instead actually invest in the things it says here to generate high productivity trends and improvements of employment, with the accompanying intention to increase the physical, economic productivity and the standard of living of the persons and households of the United States. So what kind of things increase your productivity? Well, if you're spending 6 hours a day in traffic jams commuting into the city and home again, that's an incredible waste of time. If we were to develop a really high-speed rail grid with a subway system that operated, say, on magnetically levitated trains, if people are familiar with how that works, if you've ever, when you push magnets against each other, in one way they'll just snap together, and in another way they'll push against each other. A maglev train is where the train itself floats on a magnetic field that doesn't touch the track. And this is where you can get trains that have speeds of 300, 400 miles per hour. In China, they have many trains that go 250, 300 miles per hour. They are building one that's going to go 450 miles per hour right now. And they did experiments, and Elon Musk, I think, has talked about this Hyperloop thing. Basically, you can put one of these in a vacuum tube, so it doesn't even have air, and you can get speeds of up to 1,000 miles per hour. That's faster than flying. So imagine if you could travel from New York City to DC in 20 to 30 minutes. If you could travel from New York City to Boston in a half an hour, this would completely change everything. People could live in one place, work in another. I mean, the way you see the world would be very, very different if we had a lot more nuclear power, for example, a lot more abundant, cheap energy. That would make us much more productive, these kind of things. So when you're issuing credit, you don't want to just issue credit for any old thing. You want to issue credit into those things which allow you to have that population growth curve we were looking at, that allow you to sustain a growing number of people with a higher standard of living. That's how you define what's a worthy investment and what's not. And then finally, the fourth phase of this, which I've already sort of alluded to, is fusion energy, which is beyond fission. Instead of splitting the atoms, you're fusing them together. You don't get radioactive waste from that if you use the right what is the word I'm looking for? At any rate, that you can, instead of getting a neutron particle that flies off, you can get an electron that flies off. You can go directly into generating energy without all these turbines and things. It's the next level. And I went to Princeton Plasma Physics Lab a few years ago, 6 years ago, actually. Think of what we've wasted. The engineers there thought that if we had funding for fusion, that we could develop a working prototype within 15 years. We've wasted all of this time. We should have had it really in the 80s. But at any rate, that's the energy of the future. And you see there that other drawing, which is an image of Kraft Erika, a great German space scientist who was a great collaborator and friend of LaRouche. That's his image of a city on Mars. And you see that big dome. He has a big dome and there's clouds in there. He's actually climate controlled it, figured out how to have changing weather patterns. I mean, these kind of advances for mankind are totally possible. We wouldn't be beset by viruses like we have right now. It would be completely different. So these are the four laws that we're saying have to be enacted, not bailouts, not printing money. In fact, we're really at a point where you actually we can no longer have both. And that is what the American people have to understand. If you're going to insist on bailing out Wall Street, on printing money, on trying to save this rotten mess, then your outlook is like Jeremy Warner, where you say, well, it's good that we have this disease which allows the young people to live and the old people to die off because they're a waste of energy anyway, and we should let them go. That's that outlook. What was known as the American system of Alexander Hamilton, of Henry Carey, who was Lincoln's advisor, is that you invest in your population and in creating a society where the standard of living is going up, because if you have a higher and higher standard of living, then not surprisingly, people have more leisure time and they have more room for play and thinking and creativity and actually making the kind of discoveries that all of mankind benefits from. So that's what we really want to be demanding, that LaRouche's four laws, that LaRouche is exonerated. That's the only way out. You see that I think President Trump is committed. He obviously cares deeply for the population of the United States. He is not a Malthusian like Al Gore or Jeremy Warner. We really have to mobilize everything for this fight. And even doing that, I think the situation is so far advanced that I'm afraid at the moment we're on a trajectory where we are going to overwhelm this healthcare system, and it's going to be completely devastating. Hopefully that can be prevented. That's what we're fighting for. We are not going to save this financial system, and I think we should take the approach, good riddance. It's a little nerve-wracking, but if we can recruit to the idea that we go back to the American system of physical economy, that we go with these four laws, that we will come out of this actually much better, than we went into it. And that's really what I'm committed to doing, is that we take this period, which is going to be a real challenge to everyone. Everyone's going to have a lot of time to think and to study and to become a better person, and that we organize a renaissance out of this. And the last thing I'll just say is that this cannot be done. It should be very, very clear by now that no nation on the planet can do well in isolation or do badly in isolation. If you take the case of Sweden, Sweden has decided that they're going to do absolutely nothing about this. And I lived in Sweden for a year, and I can say it's sort of a typical Swedish view. Um, you know, well, whatever happens, if people are going to die, that's how it is. And they are not preparing the hospitals. Yes, we are live now, and I can see you, Roger. Welcome. Um, these the nurses are not prepared. They're not shutting down schools. They're not doing anything. Their hospitals are going to be overwhelmed almost immediately. If you heard Cuomo's press conference, he said that the ICU rooms in New York are already at 80% of capacity. When we get the number of cases of coronavirus, that they're going to be overwhelmed quickly. But here in the US, we're trying to take measures to slow that and do something. Sweden's going to do nothing. So what does it mean if Sweden just allows the virus to take over? It means that perhaps the virus may mutate more quickly because of the density of infection. You might get something much more deadly. It means that this can spread all over the world. In other words, one nation deciding not to do anything about this isn't just about that nation, it affects the planet. Similarly, if we continue to some of the sanctions on Iran, where we're denying medicine and food to people systems who are facing this, it's not just about what's going to happen to the people of Iran. What is imposed on them is going to affect the planet as a whole. And this is why it is very urgent that President Trump, President Putin, President Xi Jinping, and Prime Minister Modi of India, the largest, most densely populated countries with the greatest scientific capabilities, that these heads of state are able to meet. And if you think about the thing for which they have attacked Trump more than anything, is the possibility of his meeting with President Putin of Russia. Why do you think this whole Russiagate crap was created? To stop that dialogue. Because if these leaders were to get together, there's virtually no problem on the planet that could not be solved, and it could solve without putting us on the brink of World War III, and could be resolved in a way for the benefit of mankind as a whole. And I think those leaders want that, but the people who created this stinking, rotten, bankrupt system, and I would say Jeffrey Epstein is sort of the poster image for the degenerate culture of taking a mass sadistic thrill of watching people suffer while you get rich and do things that cause pleasure. So it is going to be one system or the other, and I think that that the 4 laws of LaRouche are urgent, and I think that I see Glenn Nicholas has something to say. Yes, I think I know Trump is very much aware of LaRouche. I think one of the things that he's dealing with, and why it's so important that we have a movement and we have an organization, you saw it with Bolton. Everyone probably remembers he fired Bolton. And what did he say? He said, if I had listened to John Bolton, we'd be in World War VI by now. Now, many people, when Trump brought Bolton in, said, oh no, Trump has Bolton under control. Don't worry about it. He's going to work for Trump. Well, he didn't work for Trump. Our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is not working for Trump. everything he says is almost the exact opposite of what President Trump says. It's a terrible situation. And I think one of the reasons Trump got elected is because he was an outsider. He didn't come in there with 500 perfectly groomed people who had been working with him before. He was a businessman. He was not a politician. So he comes to Washington, and when you get there, you realize there are literally thousands of posts in the State Department and all these agencies and so on that you're trying to get filled. The Senate is blocking things, and he has people who are helping him with various things. And of course, they were running the impeachment operation to try and put Trump in a box, and that creates a very difficult situation. People will remember when President Trump wanted to get our troops out of Syria, and Defense Secretary Mattis resigned. And Trump said, I am an island of one. So this is why we are not doing any favors by, for example, applauding the $500 billion bailout that just happened. That's a very bad policy. We may be doing more for Trump and the country by saying, hey, this is a disaster, cut it out. Because it could very well be the case that's not exactly what he intends to do, but because of the configuration of people around him or various things that he's trying to, that's the policy that we have. So it's really urgent to be truthful, to be scientific, to have courage. So what else? If there's more questions, I can see them on the chat. Am I still, I'm not frozen, am I? My picture here is frozen. No, okay. Am I back unfrozen? I guess the gods of Wall Street don't like that discussion of not having to bail them out. Thanks, Mary Ellen. Good. By the way, there's a petition on the LaRouchePAC.com website calling for the summit among heads of state. You may know they just had a G7 meeting. That really is a waste of time unless you're going to involve China in these discussions. I mean, China's the one place on the world where they successfully actually stopped the spread of this. They also did some really excellent work in South Korea, where they have managed to really minimize the spread, and it was done with massive, massive testing. Oh yeah, here's the LaRouchePAC action page where you can get that petition to sign on, which I would encourage people to do. Actually, Dave, if you have those two pictures, the ones of the temperature screening, I thought that was kind of amazing. Look at this. This is in China, and you see the guy with a screen, and they're using infrared measuring by people who come, I guess, as an airport or a train. They actually are screening every single person's temperature, and anyone who has a fever is not going to be allowed to travel. No, it doesn't have to be martial law. But I think if people actually like to live and prevent the spread of this, we have to take a scientific approach right now because we haven't done the mass testing. And as I said, I guess it's being brought online, and it's very good that Trump enlisted Google and Walmart and all of these people who've benefited immensely from terrible free trade policies and so on, to get them to do something good. But right now, the people who have mild cases of coronavirus have no idea that they have it, and they're running around spreading it. And that's what was going on. And since it can be there for, I guess it can take anywhere from 4 to 12 days to manifest, you can get an awful large amount of people infected in that time. So it's a question of if we actually want to take a scientific approach to this thing and try and stop it or not. We also really urgently do have to build hospitals. We were talking about that earlier. I suspect our military has a great deal of capability. It's clearly not discussed because it's a matter of national security and so on, but whatever capability they have should be brought to bear. And happily, we just canceled the Europe 2020 Defender exercises, so we'll have a lot of people coming back from that. Yeah, good, Mary Ellen. Great. Are there any other questions? I would strongly recommend that people watch some of the videos that are on LaRouchePAC, or videos that we produced years ago. There's one called Firewall. If you look on YouTube for Firewall and LaRouche, which goes through what Glass-Steagall would do and what happened with the Weimar hyperinflation, which we're going to be on the brink of if we keep printing money like this. The other one is called 1932, which is a very good history of what happened at that time and the measures that were brought to bear to get out of the Great Depression. And Michelle is asking if she should call her member of Congress. Absolutely. Every congressman should be called. Every congressman should be told that they should collaborate with President Trump to solve this crisis, and that they should demand the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche and the implementation of LaRouche's 4 laws, starting with Glass-Steagall. We urgently need a real physical economy that allows the growth of the population and an improvement in the standard of living. And I guess these congressmen are not going to be having public meetings, because I know a number of the Staten Island people really did a very good job at one of Max Rose's public meetings, and it is very good to get your congressman in public on the record, and you often are getting press coverage these days, so it's very good. But they probably will be figuring out some kind of teleconference or conference calls. You can also write letters to the editor. All of these things are very important. Now, Chuckles Schumer, who, as people may know, I'm running against Chuckles Schumer in the 2022 New York election for U.S. Senate, in which he's up for re-election. He, unlike Cuomo, who, with all of his problems, seems actually interested in doing something for the people of New York. Schumer, I saw speaking at a press conference with de Blasio, wanted to just posture politically and attack Trump. I don't know what level percentage the market is going to go. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what effect these bailouts will have. And when I say gold, we don't want to have a gold standard that is 1-for-1, because you don't want to constrict credit. You don't want to limit the amount of money in circulation to the amount of gold that's available. But we want to have a reserve system so that the dollar is pegged to gold, that there's a certain value, which eliminates this floating exchange rates kind of speculation in the world. And by the way, it may not be that things are pegged to gold. LaRouche had initially called for that, and then he said, well, you could peg the key to a market basket of currencies, a market basket of commodities. But the main thing is you want some kind of stability. You don't want these games played like what the International Monetary Fund and World Bank did, or frankly, what our own banks did to us with mortgages and student loans. But as you may know, what they would do to a country like Argentina is say, well, we'll give you a loan and your currency is, or take Mexico, which I guess still has pesos, say it's 10 to the dollar. But when you repay the loan, your currency is going to be 300 to the dollar. And obviously the country cannot repay the loan. They suddenly owe 30 times more than what they borrowed. And that's part of the game of fixed exchange rates. But again, we have to begin to think of the planet as a whole. Take free trade. The way LaRouche explained free trade, why was it so bad? I mean, everyone probably agrees that the NAFTA deal with Mexico, setting up these maquiladoras, taking plants and jobs from people here and shipping them down to Mexico, where people got paid 50 cents an hour or 50 cents a day to produce an inferior product. Well, that actually was bad for the planet as a whole, because if you have a plant in Detroit, which has electricity 24 hours a day, which has an abundant supply of fresh water, which has a workforce which is well educated, highly skilled, has decent health care, you're going to have a certain quality of product, a certain level of production, a certain level of ability even to make scientific breakthroughs and discoveries on the job. So you shut that down and move it to Mexico, with no regulations, not electricity 24 hours a day, child labor, horrible conditions. Obviously, the product you produce is going to be lower grade. The population might say, well, why should I work for 50 cents a day when I can get a gun from Barack Obama's Fast and Furious program and become part of a drug cartel? And so what happens is the guy who owns the factory might make a lot of money in the short term, but the actual physical productivity on the planet as a whole goes down. The US loses and Mexico loses. And that's the point, that it's important to understand that the system now of humanity is completely interrelated. And that is not to say that national sovereignty is not important. National sovereignty is crucial. It's the only way you can address these things. Every nation should have its own national bank. Every nation should be fully self-sufficient in food production, should have a full machine tool sector. But it is the case that if you insist on destroying one part of the planet or destroying a population somewhere, you are degrading the planet as a whole. And that's why back in the actually 70s, Lyndon LaRouche warned that the policies then of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank were going to lead to new global pandemic diseases, which is exactly what we're seeing right now. Is there anything else? Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to share with you one little couple paragraphs from Mr. LaRouche, and then we can conclude. And I'd ask you to do all those things. And April 25th and 26th is going to be a major international conference, which will be a live stream. I would encourage people to set aside that weekend, set aside those 2 days. Be very important. This is from a book You can, it'll be backwards, I guess, on your, oh no, it's right. That's wonderful. To Save the Nation. It's LaRouche's program when he was running for president in 1994. And here's what he says. If you think about the dependency of people in the United States and in Western Europe on electronic transfers of money, as opposed to actual cash transfers, and realize that not only households depend upon electronic transfers in large degree, credit card debt and similar kinds of things, it's called here, but that also business firms such as a local grocery store depends on it. What happens on the day that this collapse occurs and people rely upon certain grocery stores and so forth to get their groceries? How many days' supplies of groceries for a neighborhood is represented by the stores in their area? How does the grocery store secure new supplies? That's the kind of problem that we face. There are solutions to this, as I'll indicate. We need a policy upon which our survival depends as well. It's not a matter of should we or should we not help. The question is, do we wish to survive? Because we will not survive ourselves unless we change the policies in a way which addresses our problem. But at the same time, the same policies will solve the problems of other countries as well. And that's the way to look at it. We're all in a mess, and we cannot turn our back on a neighbor and say, I don't have time to be a good Samaritan. That's not the issue. If you're not a good Samaritan, you're not likely to survive yourself. So you are the guy who's really in need, whether you know it or not. So I think I will close there. I'm really glad that all of you were on for our first YouTube meeting. And we'll be talking again. I'll be in touch with everybody before April 25th, because that'll be the next meeting, and that will be something absolutely phenomenal. And you can call or email. Dave, is there a place where people can email questions and comments? I thought that was going to be on the, yes. So classes@LaRouchePAC.com, and you can send things there even after we go off the air. I will get them. Others here who have expertise in various areas will get them. Thank you very much, and I hope to talk to all of you soon. Thanks, Melina. Take care, everyone. Good night.